This is a show about my heroes and their legacies. The legacies they're making and the ones they're breaking. These are their stories of successes and failures. These are their journeys. This is their legacy.
This is Successor.
My name is Evan Payne, and welcome to the Successor Podcast, a show dedicated to making and breaking legacies. I sit down with entrepreneurs, business leaders, foundation leaders, entertainers, and many more to learn how they're making impactful changes, not only in their industries, but in the world. This podcast is dedicated to those of you who are seeking purpose by plugging into some of my heroes who have found theirs. My guest today is Larry Smith, chairman of the board at Tokyo Electron, U.S. Tokyo Electron is a global leader in the design, manufacture, and supply of semiconductor products and services. They provide technology that enables life through semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Evan. It's a great pleasure to be here.
It's so great to have you. And I think that some of the questions that I've had when I've been preparing for this time with you, the more that I've asked myself about semiconductors, the less I feel like I know. So I do want to, in just a couple minutes, get into what they are, how they operate, why the industry is important, and why it's incredibly relevant, especially these days. But I'd also like to take a minute as we dive into a little bit of your background. I'd love to understand a little bit about some important parts of your background that might have formed, who you've become, including, your time at West Point, your time in the Army, and beyond there. So I'm just gonna take a step back and let you go.
I look forward to the journey. Evan, I grew up in northern Minnesota from a family of 5 boys and 1 girl. I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. And my father was a World War II veteran in the Pacific. So I have older brothers. I'm the 5th out of 6th. And so he served on a number of island battles in Iwo Jima, Guam, the Philippines, and Okinawa. And I think you're aware I work for a Japanese company, so it's very interesting of that upbringing, very disciplined, but a very family-oriented person. He has since passed, but when he was about 85 years old, I had the opportunity to bring him back to Japan, to some of those destinations, and we spent time in Tokyo and in Kumamoto and other parts of Japan, and then finished a weekend in Okinawa. And so the healing that came from, he didn't even buy his first Japanese car till he was about 82, and so he regretted all the previous vehicles, that he'd purchased up to that point, to see what the reliability and what could happen when actually purchasing one of those brands. But middle-class family, came back from the war, became a civil servant, a firefighter for 36 years, a leader, a wonderful man. And my mother was a homemaker and took care of us, all of our kids throughout her journey. But I knew that I had to pay for my own education. And so I used an athletic talent. In Minnesota, if you're not playing hockey, there's not much else to do. And so I used an athletic talent to get a hockey scholarship. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go to West Point, played hockey for a couple of years, and then graduated and then served in the Army, which brought me to Texas. And I got here as quickly as I could. And that's the early portion of my life from West Point. And then eventually, when I got out of the service, started my career in the semiconductor industry about 34 years ago.
Wow. Well, I imagine there wasn't a lot of hockey played when you moved to Texas, or did that continue?
It's interesting. I was stationed at Fort Hood. And it's funny you mentioned that, because Fort Hood had a hockey team, and we would come down to Austin. And this is really funny because back then there was no hockey. Now you have the Dallas Stars and the Texas Stars here in Austin. And I played at North Cross Mall. And so I'm just out of college and in good shape, and we had a team. And I had more stitches in 2.5 years playing in the North Cross Mall than I did in my previous 20-some years of playing hockey. And it was interesting because I'd go back to Fort Hood. We'd play from like 10 p.m. till about midnight. and then you're just recovering from the adrenaline. And I go back and I ended up having to have a lot of stitches. And so you go back to Fort Hood's hospital and they're like, hey, what happened to you? Because they want to know line of duty. Do you need to get investigation? And I'd say, well, I got hit with a puck or a stick or something like that. And inevitably they say, hey, it's okay. I've been in a bar fight myself. And I'm telling you the truth.
Wow, I love that. I think something that you also highlighted along the way was your bringing your father to Japan and kind of that healing journey. And I don't have a lot to elaborate on at the moment about this, but what I'm hearing, including in my story, I'm hearing more and more tidbits about how children have brought their parents to healing through events, through forgiveness, through even rehashing old events or early traumas, and so I think it's really fascinating to kind of hear that theme continue. Did you feel he was receptive to that, or did you feel like you had to drag him to that, or was that a?
No, he had told me, I wanted to go back, and I would talk. My dad's a real disciplined person, so like I would talk to him Saturday mornings. I talked to him and my mother for 20 minutes, and I'm almost to the minute, and we go through the weather, we go through kind of this script. But on one of the weekends, and I was talking to my mother, which would go instead of 20 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes, more relational. And I knew he wanted to go back. And I asked my mom, my dad wasn't on the phone that time. And I said, do you think Dad could handle a 14-hour flight? Should I ask him? I know he wanted to. And about 15 minutes later, he called me. He says, when are we going?
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, tremendously healing. I'll tell you the one significant event. We got there. You got jet lag. I set up the next day because I was kind of blending work and this whole event. And I'd set him up for a tour of Tokyo the next day after we arrived. Got down to the concierge, and I said, hey, I need to get a cab, or can we get some transportation to the tour bus? And he goes, oh, no, Mr. Smith. He says, we will have the bus show up to pick up your father. So this huge tour bus pulls up to the hotel, picks him up. They go on a 4 or 5 hour tour. And, so he's jet lagged. He's 82 years old. He's a little disoriented. He comes back, and the concierge called me. He says, well, we've had a little event with your dad today. And he said, unfortunately, he had left his satchel with his passport, money, medicine on the tour bus, and the tour bus had left. And so my dad's excited. He comes back to the concierge and he's like, Mr. Smith, please calm down. We will take care of this. And this is part of the Japanese culture. So 15 minutes later, that bus pulls up. Guy walks out, hands him that satchel with everything in it. And the respect and the dignity and the honor that he received from everyone he interacted with in that time period was a game changer. So he then left with, it was the leadership, not the Japanese people. And that was a really significant moment for him.
Wow. I feel like I need to take a second to take that all in. I appreciate you sharing that. And so let's fast forward a little bit.
Sure.
Getting into semiconductors, was that the next step after the Army and hockey? Was that immediate?
Yeah, so I spent I met my commitment for West Point, 5 years in the service. I did an additional 5 years in the reserve. As I was going through transition, I've had similar conversations with veterans, and I believe I'm called at this point, Evan, in my life, to help hire and house veterans. And you'll hear both parts of that story. But when I was deciding to get out, because I did not, I wanted my family stability. I didn't want to be moving every couple of years, and I actually used that education to pay back, not to really have a career in the Army. I'm very passionate about helping veterans now, and my dad and brother and 2 brothers have served, but never made it a career. And so I went through a headhunter that specialized in hiring military veterans with the similar educational background. I went through 2 days, 17 interviews, 45 minutes apiece across all of these different industries. And I remember as I was going through it and told the headhunter, I said, I want manufacturing. I want to have the opportunity to lead people, process engineering. And I said, I don't want any sales, because I just felt that the sales profession kind of lacked integrity. It was short term, and I didn't want that. And the guy kept telling me, he goes, I hear you, I understand. Just go to one interview. And, sure enough, 34 years later, a good portion of my career has been in sales. But the gentleman I talked to had a similar background, West Point graduate, told me, he said, it's not about transaction, it's about relationships. There's a common theme here as we go into the, homeless community and situation. And he says, we'll be working on projects with customers for 5 or 10 years. And building that trust, project managing is really part of your job, not being a transactional sales. So that's where I started.
Well, I do want to absolutely get to covering a little bit more about veterans and homelessness and the unhoused, issues and crises that we're facing. But I do want to kind of get into the early stages of that career in semiconductors. First off, I'd love to better understand what is a semiconductor.
Absolutely. Years ago when I would go and visit members of Congress, which is a pretty significant part of my role right now, the people I'd talk to were like, semiconductor chips, potato chips. What's the difference? And there's a significant difference in the fact that really it's in every aspect of our lives right now. We are not having this conversation or all of the equipment you have in this beautiful studio without semiconductor chips. During the most recent COVID crisis, people couldn't buy cars. And really the automobile is heading towards a moving computer. With autonomous vehicles and all of the computer chips that enable that to really happen. And so semiconductor chips are the devices that allow us to communicate, to process information, to running satellites, and really every aspect of our society right now are impacted by microelectronics. The market of which our customers who make chips, they use our equipment to make those chips, is about a $500 billion market. Over 500 billion. And we think in the next 5 to 7, maybe 10 years on the outset, that's going to double to about $1 trillion market. Now, these are companies, the top 5-6 companies dominate a significant portion of that $500 billion market, probably in the 60, 70, 75%. So you've got to engage. It's not a consumer-driven business. You've got to partner with those top 6. And that is a long-term relationship. You're solving problems together. But most recently, the geopolitical tension, the strategic competition with the U.S. and China has taken a global industry where you had a global supply chain that drove out efficiencies and made it very, very effective, which is now at the forefront of this tension around artificial intelligence, quantum computing, defense systems. And so what used to be a technology problem, let me help you solve that problem over a 5 or 10 year period, has now been faced with some limitations on what equipment we can sell to certain countries due to the tension with the U.S. and China in particular.
Okay, and so you mentioned several different types of technology that use semiconductors, and I'm sure we haven't even scratched the surface of that. Is there a differing level of complexity, let's say, from your smart washing machine to I don't know, a fighter jet?
Well, you're a smart guy, but in some ways it'll surprise you that even in our fighter jets, some of the sensors are maybe legacy type of technology. And let me give you an example. If you were to take a look at like the major components of chips that go into your cell phone, okay, I'm going to break it up into 3 or 4 areas to try to give you a broader area of what the industry is doing. Please. If we look at the first aspect, if you think of the brains behind your computer or your phone, we call that a logic. So it's going to provide this input and output and process things to help that device operate, okay? So logic is typically provided for a company that manufactures their own chips like Intel, okay? Intel Inside and the microprocessors. There's also logic providers that what we call are fabless designers, okay? And so actually a very large logic processor that doesn't manufacture their own chips is Apple. So, as I look at your Apple computer there, the brains of that device is actually designed by Apple, but they send it to a foundry. Okay, they found someone to manufacture their equipment, and that's a company called Taiwan Semiconductor. Now, Taiwan Semiconductor is the leading edge provider of microchips, okay? And so when you talk about some of the geopolitical tensions with Taiwan and China, this is at the forefront of that. There's a great book out right now called Chip Wars, and it kind of explains the nature of how this unfolded. But Taiwan Semiconductor is providing that leading technology for companies like Apple, Qualcomm, artificial intelligence. The leader in that right now is NVIDIA. Advanced Micro Devices. Here in Austin, you got Silicon Labs. So there's a lot of these companies that they've provided expertise in designing, and they've farmed out that manufacturing. So logic, foundry, and then memory. And there's two primary types of memory. There's dynamic memory, or DRAM, you may hear. And that is the quick memory between that logic and the rest of the device. And then there's more longer term storage, which is like NAND. And that is for your videos and your pictures. And that provides a different type of storage on your device. And it's amazing what we have on a phone right now, how that has evolved to truly the volume of what you can store on that device. So those are the major components. Automotive sector has different things, defense. We still have equipment that's been out there 30, 40 years that are producing devices at different sizes of what we call a wafer, or a semiconductor wafer that then is diced up after it's processed and put into these little chips.
Wow. Thank you. I needed that. I'm sure some listeners will have needed that as well. So do we have the skilled market or the skilled labor here to produce that? What does that look like?
Well, given this geopolitical tension, the U.S. government and industry have been working together under what we call the CHIPS Act. So a year ago, President Biden signed into law the CHIPS Act, which is an incentive for these semiconductor companies to bring their manufacturing back to the U.S. So there's, unlike any time in my 34-year career, we have these major manufacturing sites going up throughout the country. The hubs right now, Austin, Texas has got a major facility being produced up, actually just outside of Austin, up in Taylor. So Samsung. Up in Dallas, Texas Instruments is providing a very significant expansion. Then in Arizona, you've got Taiwan Semiconductor moving out of Taiwan and putting together a very advanced manufacturing facility in Phoenix. Intel is all over the United States. So they have a major presence up in the Northwest, up in Portland, Phoenix, and then they've announced a greenfield site as part of the CHIPS Act in Ohio. Micron Technology, memory provider, it's up in Boise, Idaho, and they just announced a $100 billion investment up in New York. So you got these hubs, New York, Texas, Ohio, Arizona, and up in the Northwest with both Boise, Idaho, and up in Portland that are now scaling like I've never seen before. And so the CHIPS Act, $53 billion, is trying to incentivize them to come back and offset some of the geoeconomic changes between different parts of the world in Asia, and to offset some of those cost differences that caused them to start manufacturing other parts of the world, primarily Taiwan, Korea, and China. And we'll onshore it back here for really national security reasons, supply chain reasons, and bring that manufacturing back here.
I saw a statistic, and it might have actually been from one of your interviews, that we used to have 37% of the manufacturing of chips in Texas in the U.S., and now we're down to about 12% at the moment. Is that still an accurate statistic?
Yeah, and I think this will move that needle. And then as the market expands, I think this will move the needle. There's a lot of projects going on. In fact, yesterday I was in a conversation. They talked about, the microchip was invented here in Texas with Jack Kilby There's debate on whether it's in Texas or California with Bob Noyce, but yeah, 50, 60 years ago, this was invented in the U.S.
Wow.
And we need to bring the manufacturing back here.
I'm sure us Texans will take credit for that.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned a kind of a buzz term there, greenfield projects. Does that mean that there is no supporting infrastructure around where that's being built, or what does that mean?
Yeah, it's really breaking ground in brand new farmland, or it's in a space that doesn't have the infrastructure presence to build a semiconductor manufacturing facility.
Okay, all right, thank you. And so before we pivot a little bit more into what some of the outputs are from your business, into the community and building, I'd love to ask. You've been in this industry for a lot longer than most folks have.
Yeah.
Has that always been a nice, high trajectory? I guess facing you. I mean, has that always been an easy industry to scale and grow? Have there been challenges along the way? What? Tell me a little bit about your experiences in leadership and kind of the ups and downs of that industry, if you don't mind.
Well, if you've been to an economic course, Economic 101, supply and demand, this industry fits that model perfectly. So the growth curve isn't at the 45-degree angle I just described early part of this conversation, going from $500 billion to $1 trillion, but it was really a sine curve. And it was because the early adopters, early providers of that technology may have heard of Moore's Law. Like every 2 years, the devices will double the density at a lower price. And that's been the tendency for decades. And so as you're trying to provide that additional device, that newer device, that latest and greatest microprocessor or another gigabit of memory, early providers of that technology get premium pricing. So everybody's chasing that, and they're building capacity. And then what happens is then it gets oversupplied, and then the prices drop. And then you go through this cycle. It's almost like a sine curve, peaks and valleys. The amplitude of those sine curves now are much tighter, and we've been on a growth curve until the pause right now this year, probably over the last 5 to 7 years of a pretty continual growth. COVID drove a significant growth in our business. And it was because we went to working out of our homes. We had remote learning. We had to put in the data centers to enable that. People were buying additional devices, both phones and computers, to adapt to the COVID environment. And so that caused some of the challenges with people not getting chips from the automotive industry. Automotive industry is just in time, and they perfected that over the last couple of decades. Well, when they shut that off at the beginning of COVID, the demand or the capacity was filled with all of this other demand. Wow. Okay, so all of a sudden, our customers, they had huge demand from data centers and mobile devices and computers and other things. And so then when the automotive industry wanted to turn that back on because they started to see the demand, there was kind of like getting to the back of the line. And so created some challenges there within the supply chain. And so those are some of the things that we see. So sine curves, and then the technology. We've continued to run into roadblocks, and the innovative nature of the Western world and the U.S. Has overcome those repeatedly. And so like right now, we're in the 5 nanometer, 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer. We're manipulating atoms. And you're going to see, billions of transistors or device on or off devices, billions of those on a chip the size of your thumbnail. And I've been in this business a long time. My mind continually is just like overwhelmed with what the capacity and capability of our industry.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing that. And I know that we're going to start moving into some topics that are a little bit more about vulnerable folks.
Yeah.
That we have a passion for, and that you specifically have a passion for. But before we get into that, I'm going to ask for a moment of vulnerability from you, though.
Sure.
Feel free to not answer this question, but if you're willing, since you've been called to leadership, I think there's a lot of fear of folks that are called to leadership about the fear of failure, right? And how that's such a limiting mindset to potential leaders and maybe even current leaders. Have you had any moments along that journey where maybe failure has defined you or helped define your career path from there on out?
How much time do you have?
You can stick to as many as you want.
I can think of two very significant ones. When I was in the Army, I just got out of the academy, and they send you to a school to train you in the profession that you'll lead. And mine was in tanks. Okay, so you spend about 6 months, then going from an academic environment into a practical applications of how you maneuver and execute. And so when I came to my first unit at Fort Hood, one of the traditions of a new leader, of a new lieutenant, and so you're 22, 23 years old. You're going to lead a platoon. You've got a platoon sergeant that's probably got 17 to 20 years of experience. Mine was a Vietnam veteran. So here you got this young kid, myself, and this seasoned veteran, and that's the way the Army works. You got non-commissioned officers and officers. And so what the tradition was is you went out to your first field problem is you took the junior lieutenant and you gave him the task to go out and do a road march and let him get lost in land navigation. So we're going to humble you immediately and see how you respond to that. And so sure enough, my first field problem, I knew it was coming. I had prepared. I wanted to make sure I could display that I was professional and could earn the respect of my team. And Captain Corda was my commander, and we went to the operations order, and I was ready. Hey, give me the mission. And then when we got there, he said, "All right, Smith's going to lead the mission tonight to the destination, but we're not going to do it at 3:00. We're going to do it at 2100 in the dark." So I had reconned, I had gotten out my Jeep, I had my maps. This is prior to GPSs now, so you actually had to read a map and figure the contours of getting there. And my panic button went off, because I'd done all this preparation. So I really felt I was going to fail, and how was I going to respond to that? And so I walked away from that order, and then I felt, all right, I got to dig in, I got to do this. And the first sergeant, even more senior, like the captain's company commander's first sergeant, Jesse Copeland. This is a long time ago. And Jesse comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, LT, do you want some help?" Well, it's my pride. Am I going to say, no, I got it? Am I going to risk that? And so that's where you have to make some decisions at times of, am I going to be willing and vulnerable to ask for some help? Because I don't know everything. And I said, "Yeah, top man, I need some help." He gave me a couple practical things. So he says, hey, LT, he says, your driver, the odometer on your tank's in kilometers. It's not miles. And the grid on your map is in kilometers. Those squares are in kilometers. Oh, by the way, your gunner, when he holds, the toggles on the turret, he says, we have a stabilizer, and if you put your turret pointed with your compass in the direction you're supposed to go, it will stay there. So you work as a team. Your gunner will hold, you follow the gun tube, you got your azimuth, and Private Reed, my driver, is going to tell you, LT, every time that kilometer goes to another click.
Wow.
And you will know exactly where you're going. And sure enough, got him to where I needed to do, which defied all that logic. So I fast forward, I was then in charge of a range, and I made a mistake because I was in charge. I didn't go back and check on my tanks to make sure the ammunition was out of our tanks. And it's like a cardinal sin if you go back to the mortar pool, and it's kind of like a loaded gun, but it's 120 millimeter, okay? So sure enough, I'm distracted, didn't check on my tanks, and that before they were heading back to the motor pool, and you certainly don't want a tank loaded with ammunition in a motor pool. And when I got back to the motor pool, we went back to accountability and found that my tank had ammunition on it. And this is probably months later, so that I talk about being humble enough to ask for some help. This was months later, and I'd established some credibility and reputation with the leadership there. And that was so severe, the colonel was going to give me like punishment that could ruin my career, actually, the fact that I had that ammunition. Well, Jesse Copeland went to Colonel Keller, and he says, Colonel, I think this young man's got some potential. Don't ruin his career over this one mistake. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. So then how do we create excellence instead of perfection? How do we create an environment where people can learn from their mistakes? We call them in the Army after action reviews. And you always start, when you left an operation, you said, hey, what went well? And you have your whole platoon and everyone could provide input. But what could we do better? So that was my significant failure in the Army that kind of shaped me. And then how do I treat other people in that space? Allow space for failure. Kind of fast to fail when we're dealing with technology. But then the low point of my career was probably 12 or 13 years ago when I got a call that one of my teammates had plumbed a line incorrectly at a customer site and caused a contamination of the factory and caused damage to the product and the customer in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So sometimes when I meet with young people like you or others, and I ask them, hey, what was the cost of your biggest mistake that you survived? $100, $1,000, $10,000, and it's really fun to kind of have that dialogue as you're sharing. And I said, I survived a multi-$100 million mistake.
Wow.
And it caused you to pause. That's kind of the company I work for. I thought I'd be fired, probably could be justified for that as the leader of a company that caused that kind of damage. But out of the ashes of that problem, we created what we call Journey to Excellence. And my colleague and I went and said, hey, what caused this problem? And from a top down, we were like, you follow procedure or you stop the work, kind of like pulling the cord on a Toyota manufacturing site, you know? And so as we were meeting with hundreds of people over shifts and kind of communicated, follow that procedure, stop work. Any questions? 45 minutes. Hands are raised. Well, what if the documentation's in Japanese? What if the customer locks down that documentation? What if we don't have Wi-Fi access? What if we did it? And before you know it, you know people want to do the right thing,
Right.
but then we create some limitations. And so in the end, when we came back to the customer and said, they often ask the question, how are you going to prevent this from ever happening again? Okay. And we came back with this top-down solution. He said, did you run back by the field to see if that was going to be inadequate, see if they could actually implement your solution? Very humbling experience because I had to say no. So we created this competitive, differentiated process now where we select about a dozen employees. We get them for their character, their competence, and their willingness to help solve the problem. Over 14 years, we've probably run 100 people through that process. I should say 100 projects and more than 100 people. And it's changed our company.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. So you have a career in, I would say, being called to help solve complex issues, right? And I think what you've mentioned also is identifying people that want to do the right thing or want to improve their situation. And I'd like to kind of start off with this this call to help veterans, because you did mention that a little bit earlier, and I understand that you guys get significant interest in helping them, helping veterans get jobs and get homes. But how is that a good fit for your industry? Veterans coming into your industry.
Well, it's part of my story. And when you talk to people who used to run around in tanks or repair tanks and say, hey, I want you to manipulate atoms and make microchips, I think I'll go work in a manufacturing, I'll go repair cars or drive trucks. So it's intimidating industry. But it's been a wonderful career for me. Great paying jobs, great industry, smart people. I couldn't have had a better career from my perspective. So I want to give that opportunity to veterans that may be intimidated by the industry. We want to hire people with the attributes that come from a military experience. we can train you. And so when you look at teamwork and discipline and commitment and competitive nature, and they're willing to suffer through some things at times and still never give up. So those attributes are really important to solve difficult problems and to never give up as we continue to provide. I mean, I know you want to go back to a 486 computer, right? So we have to be able to keep up with the demand of the consumer. And we like those attributes. I like to split it up into thirds, like bachelor's and above degreed type of 33% in that space. And want to have the technical schools, maybe associate's degrees or technical colleges, and then a 20 or 30% of our veteran population is kind of the demographic from a very basic target when we look at the talent that we're trying to recruit, hire, train, retain.
That's neat. And do you find any advantages to hiring veterans?
Yeah, I'm very biased, I would say, but I also equal opportunities across all services, like Navy nukes and airmen and airwomen, and actually the military service is a good source of diversity and talent and leadership. And so we found some amazing people that are in our industry.
Well, because this podcast is about legacy, right, and breaking old legacies, making new ones, and using those platforms to make what I'd consider meaningful investments in current and future generations, I'd love to move to a topic that I think can be a bit uncomfortable, and that is talking about homelessness, the unhoused, and how can we educate ourselves and actually take action on that education, and learn a little bit about your history with that. With that, I'd love to really talk about what your involvement has been, how that became a calling of yours with the homeless crises abound, and how you kind of gained a heart for that issue.
Evan, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. This is an important part of my life, and it comes really from my faith journey also. So I can't tell this story without being vulnerable in that space, actually.
Please do.
So about 15 years ago, I live right down the road from where we're having this conversation. About 15 years ago, my wife and I were part of a church plant, and we were going to go down to the center of Austin and care for the poor and the oppressed, the widow, the orphan, and it was an amazing experience. And people ended up adopting from all over the world. We were working in nursing homes. I started to work with people out of prison and the homeless community. And then we actually had several people become international missionaries out of this really small group of people, like maybe 100 people. And so when we started to connect and work with the homeless, actually I first started picking up like guys that were at this place called the Push Up. And that was like a 90-day transitional housing for people coming out of prison. And then you started to see people on the sides of the streets, and I literally go down to their dwelling and pick them up and bring them back for Sunday night services. And we always had a meal together and just started to build those relationships. Well, that's where I met Mobile Loaves and Fishes 15 years ago. And Mobile Loaves and Fishes, over their 25-year journey now, we're celebrating 25 years this fall with the founder, Alan Graham, and 5 other gentlemen. Over that 25-year journey, they've fed 6.2, 6.3 million meals to the Austin community. So I got exposed to it, and there was a guy named Bren Wilson, and I started to do monthly truck runs with him. We would go to 4 or 5 different destinations around the city and feed people out of this Mobile Loaves and Fishes truck. Well, you've got a little bit of my background, all right? Disciplined, West Point, lead a company. There's a certain mentality there, all right? And so I would come into this opportunity. It was like, how could I effectively and efficiently feed as many people as possible in the least amount of time? Okay, so I'm like, line up, behave, no fighting. And my buddy Bren is literally on the curb, and he knows the person's name. He knows their drug of choice. He knows their story. He knows their hometown. And I doubt that I could even mention a name. And I'm not proud of that. And that's the vulnerability of, I was really transactional, and Bren showed me a side of being relational. And so as you start to go through this and you meet people on the street and you start to build these relationships, my wife and I, Jimmy was our first candidate. We started to put him in like a hotel, for weeks at a time. We tried to then Mobiles and Fishes, as they evolved the ministry, they started to put people in RV parks, like a cul-de-sac. And they'd have 4 or 5 our RVs, and they'd put them in there. And that was the beginning of trying to get them not just a 4 or 5 hour food gap to get them through that day, but now we're starting to get them off the street and into a place where they can have shelter and safety and heal from the ravages of trauma that they've experienced. And so that was the beginning of the exposure. Eventually, we were part of a small group that we went out and said, hey, can we, as part of our church, we want to know, grow, and serve. Could our small group go out and this community that was breaking ground 10 years ago? And our service opportunity was maybe start to build relationships there. And before we know it, we're in Alan Graham's house and trying to decide whether to discern we're going to live out there. And we moved from our 3,900 square foot home on 3 acres right down the road from you, into a 380 square foot RV for a number of years, and lived in a community of formerly homeless people we call Community First.
Wow. Okay. So before we get into that, I have to ask, making this move, were you more hesitant, or was your wife more hesitant to make that move?
Oh man, you're really asking me to vulnerable here now. So my wife has a medical condition that flares up. She has lupus, and so there's occasionally she has these flares that take her out for a while. And so I was at Alan Graham's house with maybe 30 people that night. It was the discernment night. Are you in or are you out? To go and be what we call missional, but they're like an intentional neighbor. We're going to love God and love people, and we're going to live in that community and just be hospitable and care and just navigate it with your gifts. So I'm at Alan's house, and actually Wendy and I were my wife, we were planning to support friends of ours that already had committed to live there. So they were going to say yes, and we were going to be prayerful support, financial support. We were going to be partners in this whole deal. Where he's going around the circle, and he stops at this young woman who's on Skype at the time. This is a few years ago. And she was engaged to a friend of mine that they were going to be newlyweds and move into an RV on this property. So that's one extreme. But she said a quote that really pierced my heart. And she said, I had a professor in college that said, you really should live your life as if it doesn't make sense without the gospel. Caused me to pause. My job, my house, my kids. As I mentally went through an assessment, I was like, does it make more sense by God's standard or by the world's standard? And it caused me to pause. But unfortunately, I wasn't obedient to that pause or calling or prompting. Alan comes to me, so it's like, I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I can't. There was really an interesting evening. Comes to me and he goes, and I've known Alan for quite a while at this point. And he goes, Larry, you in or out? Wendy's not with me. Alan, I'll give you my time, my talents and treasures. I am not going to live in that community. Hey, that's fine. I need all of that. So I drive home that night, just kind of pondering that whole experience. I go to church the next day. And the pastor's preaching about caring for the poor and the oppressed and the widow and the orphan. And you don't have to go to Africa. You can go to the east side of Austin and carry out this calling. So those are 2 whacks over the head. And so I really felt the prompting of, we need to do something different here. And I came home. Wendy wasn't at church that day either. She's still recovering from the flare. And I came home and I said, hey, Wendy, I think we're supposed to go live out in that community. And she goes, well, it's about time. Oh.
Was that the third whack?
Third whack. So then disobedience, obedience. The next weekend we went and bought an RV. And then it stayed in storage for 9 months while the property was getting prepared. And so calling, we all have a calling and giftedness and resources. What standard are we applying it to? Is it only for our own? Is the legacy how selfish we can behave? is the legacy that we were faithful and good stewards of what God has given us with time, talents, and treasures? Where does that legacy show up? And so we moved on the property. We lived in the RV for about, 2.5, 3 years. And then my wife designed a tiny home. So we went from this, 380 square foot RV to a 540 square foot tiny home. I call it the Taj Mawendi. And it's amazing what you can do with just a smaller space.
Wow. I mean, another lesson is that our wives certainly make us better.
Amen.
So, if I remember correctly, I think you told me about some form of initiation period to be able to, or maybe an overnight.
That was, so I'm on the board of directors. I'm currently a chairman of the board for Mobiles and Fishes. Okay. My final interview to join the board was 24 hours out on the street with Alan Graham.
Oh boy. Okay. Let's hop into that if you don't mind.
Okay. So there's no initiation or hazing to get on the property, but that was my final interview to join the board of directors of Mobiles and Fishes, which I've had the honor of serving for a number of years.
Okay. Thanks for giving me some clarity around that. I have to say I don't know that is something that I'm willing to or ready to take up, but maybe that's where I need to check my heart.
I was not either. So we spent 24 hours on the street, no food, no money, no phone, like a pad to sleep on and a change of socks, like a backpack. Started at Zilker Park, and I took a meal off a truck that I'd been serving off a Mobiles and Fishes truck. Got myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and some chips and a drink, and was a recipient of that ministry before we started our 24-hour journey. And very unique experience.
Let's face it, you need to take better care of yourself, and you don't make the time. One week you neglect your fitness goals, and the next week you neglect your nutrition goals, but you have pre-workouts and supplements and convenient meal prep and food delivery options. So lack of time is usually the root cause. So what about your hair? Well, now there's an on-the-go solution for you. FreeWell has been called the pre-workout for your hair, but it doesn't just work for an hour, it works all day. FreeWell's Power Gloss delivers moisture while repairing your hair from root to tip and balancing your scalp for the ultimate and best hair health. This is made for everyone, and fellas, this is what I use to style my hair most days. Plus, you're not only helping yourself and the people who look at you, you're helping the world, and that's why FreeWell gives a portion of all revenues to fight human trafficking on the ground. Use my code Successor, that's SXSSR, for 20% off your order today at livefreewell.com. Use my code Successor, that's SXSSR, for 20% off your order today at livefreewell.com. Wow, I'm sure there's probably a lot more we can unpack there, but I'd like to also get into really our primary focus, and that is on the folks that are actually dealing with this every single day. First off, I want to ask. I noticed that some of the language changed from homeless, the homeless to the unhoused. Or am I using that terminology correctly? Is there a change in some of the language, and if so, what's the purpose behind that?
So in our community, they've changed from homeless to unhoused. So if the problem statement is we have unhoused people, what's the solution?
A house.
House them. We believe, with our experience and my 15 years experience and Mobiles and Fish's 25-year experience, that the primary cause of homelessness is not housing, but it's the catastrophic loss of family. Think about that, okay? As you experience people on the street, we all make assumptions, okay? But we believe that they're at the end of a broken system, but primarily that family unit. We all have addiction issues and mental health issues in our family. I'd be surprised that anybody that's listening to this podcast doesn't have that within their family unit. But most of those family units have a safety net that prevents these individuals from ultimately ending on the street. And if that's the primary cause of it, we believe housing will not solve homelessness or mitigate it, but community will. And so the property of where we currently house about 400 plus neighbors, formerly homeless, formerly chronically homeless neighbors, in a 52-acre community of tiny homes, RVs, and eclectic entrepreneurial additions in this beautiful community where they have ownership, they have the opportunity to heal, they have people that are surrounding them with love. We have volunteers pre-COVID, like 11,000 volunteers that are part of this community. So that's the key component, is that we become, as opposed to the biological family, we are now becoming this nuclear family that can help them heal. We're not there to fix them, and that's what we want to do, but it's also a difference between doing and being. Being the hands and feet of Christ, being relational, being engaged in the messiness of homelessness. And that's a couple of points that we differentiate ourselves relative to a government solution that is to get them into housing. Now, they do want to provide surrounding services, but if you take dysfunctional individuals that are broken and just relocate them from the street into a revamped hotel or apartment without healthy, not perfect community, but healthy community and surround services in there, you're going to have a hard time seeing people heal from that.
Wow. And was this model that we're aware of, was this model started here in Austin, or this was kind of the birthplace of this model?
Yeah. And Alan's an entrepreneur. He was called 25 years to go start feeding the homeless, and he's done it for 25 years, and he's sacrificed. He and his wife Trish are saints, in my mind, and they poured into this. But when you talk about calling and legacy, you know what his profession was before he was called to feed the homeless?
What's that?
Real estate developer.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty rich.
You've been to the site, right?
Oh yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and we're definitely gonna see a video clip of how amazing it is too, because I was a bit shocked. When I heard about the property, and people say it's beautiful. There's a lot of cool things going on. You can't even begin to scratch the surface without being there.
So, as a leader, as an influencer, we've one of my former employees at Tokyo Electron is a staff member at Mobiles and Fishes now, and I'm very grateful for her of sacrificing and using her gifts in a different way. She leads our replication model. So she has been responsible in our team, but she's the leader of this group that has trained over 600 people from 200 cities.
Really?
So rather than us scatter all over the country and train people, we invite them to stay on the property in a tiny home for 3 days. And we go through our mission, vision, values, fundraising, and how we currently are leading this effort. And we've got about a dozen what I would consider advanced replicators, 6 that have been doing it for a number of years. And then that's one of the passions I love to continue to engage with, is how do we help those individuals scale and not copy, but replicate. So some you may have up in Minnesota, there's a Sacred Settlements, and there's a woman that did her PhD, Gabrielle Cloudis. I love that woman. And she came and studied our model, and she contrasted Housing First, which initiated in the Reagan eras back in the 80s, pushed them out into the community, and Housing First versus literally Community First in Austin, Texas. PhD study on that. Alan, as she was spending time with us and interviewed us and lived in the community for weeks, said, get one person off the street. I love your study. I love you're going to be a doctor. Get one person off the street. She is now, I was there a couple weeks ago up in Minneapolis. She's got 3 churches that are putting tiny homes on their church parking lots and extra property. She's worked for 4 years to change the legislation. January 1st, they couldn't, with zoning issues, put RVs or tiny homes on their property. It was all restricted. And then now the Lutheran Church has issued like a referendum, or a proclamation is a better statement, that they all should consider a sacred sentiment on their property in Minnesota. Get one person. You and I can scale one.
Right.
Community first is overwhelming with the scale, but we're replicating people that are doing it at a manageable level.
That's unbelievable. And so if we were to look at the take a best guess from the current population of folks that are homeless throughout the U.S. Let's just take Austin as an example. Do we have an idea of what percentage we might be able to get off of the streets or out of chronic homelessness?
You know, the number is politically charged a little bit, so I'm not going to throw out a number, but I'll give you a range, let's say. And I think the U.S. population is about 500,000 people. Okay. I believe in Austin we're talking in the thousands, you know, a couple of thousand to maybe 5 again. And they do some assessments. They go out to the camps and they do assessment. I don't know if it's annual or every couple of years, but I think it's on an annual basis just to kind of assess what's happening in that space. We currently, with phase 1 and phase 2, we have 400 heading towards 500. We have 2 more pieces of property. We've broken ground across the street from the current site, and we'll probably have another 500 there. And before we're done with phase 4 with 76 acres down on Burleson Road, we'll probably 1,800 to 2,000 people. I did mention chronically homeless, so we're laser focused on people that have been homeless for at least a year or multiple years, and it's not likely they'll get off the street due to a mental or physical disability. So we're not doing everybody, and so that demographic or that focus, our average age is 58 years old, and average time on the street is 10 years.
Wow. So
that's why we're working with a very specific population, the least of these. They're not with us. They're not probably they'll probably die on the streets. And so we treat them, you know, we want them to be known. We want them to be loved. I think part of the tour, you probably got to see our columbarium. This is not transitional housing. This is their home, to the point that when they pass, and we've had people pass with dignity and love, we honor them, and their ashes are on our property, versus if they were to pass on the street, you know, they're going to end up in an unmarked grave somewhere in our city.
Unreal. It's another one of those moments I feel like I need to just take a pause, and you know, even though I've been there, I think it still is it's a mix of exciting what's going on, and there's still a sense of mourning around the problem that it has become. And you know, meeting some of the folks on the property, I think was really changed my perception and the amount of pride that they took in what they've been able to accomplish there in their life. Now, do you see people that then move from community first out into housing, or is that part of the plan as well?
It's not. You know, it is their home. It's their, you know, it's permanent housing, not transitional. We've had people leave. You know, so there's some basic rules: follow the law of the land, you know, follow the HOA rules of the community, and you got to pay rent. So there's some ownership in there, versus just a handout. So they got some skin in the game there. And then we provide opportunities for them to work on the property, earn dignified income versus flying a sign. Some of my favorite moments when you come onto the property, you may see somebody in a wheelchair with some missing limbs from diabetes and some challenges there, and they got a leaf blower, and they're, you know, one of our neighbors may have mowed the lawn, and he's blowing the grass clippings off the driveways and the roadways of our community. And so it could be in art, the innovation hub, could be in the gardens, could be in food preparation. We have an outdoor theater from the Alamo Draft House, so they could be working there. We have a bed and breakfast that needs to be cleaned and sheets washed. All of those are opportunities for our neighbors to engage and be part of our vision is to empower communities into a lifestyle of service with the homeless. Now, we do a lot of things to carry out that vision, but it's to empower the community of Austin, Texas, the community of the United States. okay,
Yeah.
to get into that mission.
That's fascinating. And we're going to, in just a couple minutes, jump into a portion of a video that highlights a few of the things that you mentioned. But I will encourage listeners now and later to do the same thing. That is, go watch the full video. I'll have all the links in the description of the video as well that we talk about today. But it is worth watching. And take aside a few minutes, put aside some distractions, and really take it all in. And because a part of what my calling is, my calling is to discuss fatherless homes, right, and the impacts of those, and those may or may not be aligned with the catastrophic loss of family, but a few statistics I found that stood out to me was, it says 90% of all runaway and homeless children come from fatherless homes, and then 75% of adolescents in substance abuse centers come from fatherless homes. And then here's where it gets a little bit crazier, is that children that live in fatherless homes are 279% more likely to deal drugs or carry firearms for offensive purposes, and then 85% of youth who are currently in prison grew up in a fatherless home. And why all those stood out to me is that with every one of those statistics, I'm seeing an increasing risk of ending up in a situation where you can't pay your bills, you're estranged from family, and you're stuck in a situation that you feel like you can never recover from.
Catastrophic loss of family is what you've just described, with the absence of leadership and unity. Those are statistics that at the end of that broken system, they end up living with us.
All right. Well, I'm hoping that through conversations like this and actionable items that come out of conversations like this, that we can begin as a community tackling the problem from both sides.
And the thing I like about some of our replicators is they're getting creative of, all right, rather than housing or bringing the homeless into our community where they can heal, why don't we get upstream? So like one of the things you described is like one of our partners is putting tiny homes on their church property for kids aging out of the foster system.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So we know the foster system has a high percentage because of the lack of family and parents and those kinds of things, or maybe they've been placed an average of 17, families throughout their foster experience. And so how do we create that forged family that can fill in for the gaps in leadership, fathers, unified families? How do create and encourage them for mentors or trainers or things like that? And so actually my daughter is a foster parent. So we've now experienced over the last 6 years of having a foster grandchild and working through the legal system and child protective services and the families and stuff. And one of the things that we had to go through to literally be able to babysit our granddaughter is we used an agency to get certified, and we do it on an annual basis, but it's called Fostering Hope. And we went through this training to be able to babysit, and they had a social worker there that helped us coach us on how to care for kids from hard places, okay? And maybe trauma, abuse, the stories are pretty horrific. But the training was amazing. So my wife and I we've been married 35 years, raised 2 adult daughters, and we're going through this training, and we're like, did that wrong. Did that one really wrong. Oh, didn't even know about that one. And so I was trying to think through, how could we be more proactive? And I don't know if it's in communities or influencers or churches or civic centers or whatever, but I was like, man, that training they gave to us so that we could babysit would be so invaluable to those parents or single moms or single dad, or whatever that looks like, to give them more skills. Or you bring alongside a mentor or a coach, or, it takes a village. We've heard that a lot of times, and that has political ramifications, but really a community can surround people and help raise these children. So those are other ways that we've got to think about it differently, because otherwise we're going to be housing a lot of broken people.
Well, I appreciate you sharing it. As a father of 2 daughters, I'm going to wait a little while before I No, I probably should actually start early. Well, let's take a second. Let's switch over to a clip of this video, and I'd love to just, for our viewers to have the opportunity to see what Community First is all about, and we'll do a little recap and go from there.
Perfect.
Community First Village is a 51-acre master plan development that provides affordable permanent housing along with a supportive community for men and women who are transitioning out of chronic homelessness. Driven by a vision to empower the broader community into a lifestyle of service with the homeless, everything you see around the village is designed to foster relationships. One of the first things you see when entering the village is the neighborhood's large outdoor movie screen and amphitheater. The space can hold about 400 guests and provides the perfect setting for regular movie nights or other special events hosted at the village. Surrounding the amphitheater is the village's bed and breakfast operation known as the Community Inn. This eclectic mix of tiny home and RV units is open to the public for reservations through Airbnb or directly through the inn's website, making it possible for guests from around the world to experience Community First Village firsthand. In addition to providing guests with a unique overnight stay, the inn also provides work opportunities for some of the men and women living in the village. Their work with housekeeping and landscaping around the inn helps them earn a dignified income for their services. Just past the amphitheater and Community Inn is an on-site Capital Metro bus stop. With direct access to mass transportation, neighbors have an easier time getting around to other parts of the city as needed. Across the street from the bus stop is the Topfer Family Health Resource Center. This on-site clinic, managed by MLF Partners, is the primary spot in the village where neighbors have access to integrated physical and mental health care services. Because of the clinic, men and women living in Community First Village can get many of their health care needs addressed on-site. Right next door to the clinic is the Community Market, a small convenience store of sorts. The market makes it possible for neighbors to purchase small grocery items and other basic needs. Importantly, the market is also a central hub for showcasing and selling the products and goods created by different artists and makers who live in the village. The handcrafted gifts you see in the market come out of Mobile Loaves and Fish's Community Works program. Community Works provides opportunities for our formerly homeless neighbors to rediscover purpose and use their God-given talents to earn a dignified income. The program includes an art house where pottery, jewelry making, and fine art are brought to life, a blacksmith shop where one-of-a-kind metalworks are produced, and a wood shop where carpentry skills are put to use. Whenever a product is purchased, the Community First neighbor who made the product earns 100% of the profit from the sale. Community Works also includes different contract-based services around the village, such as groundskeeping and gardening, catering and concessions, or housekeeping and janitorial services. It even includes a car care operation, which is located just past the market in the village's very active maintenance building. Need an oil change or a car wash? Community First Car Care provides our neighbors who have a passion for servicing cars an opportunity to be of service to you. As you leave the maintenance building and move a bit deeper into the village, you're now entering a part of the neighborhood affectionately referred to as Tiny Town. This part of Community First is home to a diverse array of tiny homes, about 130 of them, designed and constructed by some of the city's most talented architects and builders, and arranged in such a way to help foster community among neighbors. Since none of the tiny homes has plumbing or full kitchens, this area of the village is connected to 5 outdoor kitchens. Residents have access to the kitchens anytime they want, providing them a spot where they can make great meals together and connect with other neighbors, human to human, heart to heart, through the fellowship of food. Neighbors in Tiny Town also have access to 5 nearby laundry, restroom, shower facilities. These buildings provide private showers and restrooms, along with mini laundromats where residents can do their laundry however often they please. You might realize by now there's a little of everything in Community First Village. Other amenities around the property include a library that's open throughout the week, a tucked-away chapel for social and spiritual connection, a barber shop for that occasional haircut, an on-site grill for delicious burgers and other meals, an outdoor dining area that we call the community table. We even have a dog park in the neighborhood for the many four-legged friends who live here as well.
Man, thanks for watching that with me.
Yeah.
So I did want to ask a couple questions about this because, and I think we've answered a lot of the questions that I had along the way, and so I really appreciate it. I believe that you refer to the residents as neighbors.
Yeah.
They're correct. I do love that. I thought that was really a neat way to foster that idea of connection with one another.
Gives dignity.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask, if you could describe any of the challenges of balancing your calling to community first with your professional career, because that one I think that blew my mind thinking about moving from a very comfortable lifestyle to one a bit more challenging while still having a full plate.
Yeah. I used to travel a couple 100,000 miles a year, about 10 trips a year to Japan pre-COVID, so over the last 23 years, I've put a lot of miles, in that space. Lead a company of over 2,000 people with a couple $1 billion in revenue. So the scale and scope, I have 17 sites around the U.S., so I travel a lot. The thing I love about it, when you're balancing where we were living, is my name there was Wendy's husband. So, this really allowed my wife to flourish with her gifts and talents. And a few people knew what I did for a living. And I would get asked for sponsorship on new business opportunities and occasionally would get requests for financial support, and discerning some of those things is interesting. But it's amazing what you can do without when you're in that kind of role. When we transition, maybe I did it with your tour, I often like to ask people, hey, what 3 things do you think we needed when we moved from the RV to the tiny home? It's kind of like, what were the 3 things we missed? And I get a wide variety of responses to that question. And the 3 things we were missing when my wife designed the tiny home, she wanted a bathtub. Okay, that was one thing. I needed a closet. So like in the back of my pickup truck, I had all my clothes because there was no, so I think the company was starting to wonder if we were going to go under because the president, has got his clothes in the back of his pickup truck. And then the last thing, we wanted a washer and dryer. So, in the video you saw the public washers and dryers, which is great. But on occasion, they're kind of harsh on your clothing, the high temperatures, and just, from a laundromat kind of standpoint. And occasionally we would have a few missing items, and a few of our neighbors were wearing my wife's clothing as you're walking down the street. So it created not tension, but opportunities to strengthen the relationship.
I love that you've had the opportunity. Well, I'd say more than an opportunity, that you've had the experience of spending that much time on the property. How do you think it has grown your faith, and if so, how do you think it's maybe changed your lens on maybe how God views us?
Yeah, I think it has. It's been, it went after the first few months there. We thought, we're going there to serve. And I remember Wendy and I were walking back from a meeting one night, and it was probably a Saturday night, walking back to the RV, and we just kind of reflected and said, this really is not a service opportunity. It's a privilege, to be part of this movement, part of this journey. And so it has been a blessing. Things changed during COVID with restrictions and family dynamics that we ended up moving off the property because daughter couldn't stay with us, and we sold everything, and so we ended up buying a house about 8 minutes up the road after 5.5 years on the property. But I refer back to, many times in our faith journey, there's this intellectual aspect of our faith, theology. Community First provides this unique opportunity for unity across denominations. Because what are you trying to do? You're focused on love. Love thy neighbor. Now, theology is important and it's critical, but we've blended Catholics and Protestants, and it's a unique place that even we have a community of Steiner Ranch that has been feeding the community for 8 years, probably 8+ years. It's not a religious organization, it's a community. They come from Steiner Ranch. It's got to be an hour drive all the way across town. They come and feed a couple hundred people every Thursday night. I went to dinner one night, and everybody there feeding us was of a Muslim faith. Where else can you have that?
Right.
Where else can you have that? So God touched my heart, and then I used my hands, my gifts and talents, and it probably challenged me in every aspect of that.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing that, and I think the words that they use there in the video is they talk about dignifying work. That one at first got me questioning is what is considered undignifying work, but what do they mean when they describe dignifying work for the people on the property?
So it's interesting because I would have debates with one in particular, one of our neighbors, that, hey, I'm going to work. I'm going to go fly a sign and beg for the next 6 hours and see how well I do. What are you producing? That's really begging. So you're having an honest conversation, but his view was that I'm going out to work to get my income for the day. And so there's this perception of work, Alan Graham refers back to Genesis 3, and he placed them in the garden, and it was good, and there was work that was required, the Garden of Eden at the time. And so work, dignified work, to where you're contributing to this community and you're receiving compensation for that, and be part of the greater community has been part of this original plan. And so I just see that as beautiful. And many of our neighbors are on disability and government support, which is fine. That's the stage of life or the situation that they're in. But they can augment it. And we have what we call the Gus bus, the goodness bus, a little golf cart that many of our neighbors now drive others around the 52-acre community and just get them from destination to destination. So that's a contract and allows them to have dignity and connect and build relationships, and kind of like probably a bartender listening to the challenges of the day. But those are some of the examples.
Wow. I love that you point to the garden as well, because on the property as well, there's an incredible garden or series of gardens. And one thing that when we went to go volunteer on the property, I was a little bit jealous of my friends that got to go work in the garden, because we went to go pull weeds. But I was, by the end of that experience, I was so thankful that I was pulling weeds, because we got to make such a great connection with one of the neighbors there and spend so much time around her. And I was like, I wouldn't have traded that experience for anything.
A neighbor was your tour guide for the day, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How powerful is that?
Right. And again, going back to the amount of pride when they show you their home and invite you inside, I don't know that I would want to invite a bunch of strangers in my home, but I mean the joy which they showed off. Here's what I've done with the home. Here's a picture of me on a magazine with my home. It was very humbling. It was really it really touched my heart. And a couple more things I want to touch on real quick about Community First too was I saw that in the video they have transportation. They have a city bus that comes. They have medical services and dog parks and clean homes and facilities and all of these things that I think when I think about what are all the things that somebody that is on the streets might need, those are very top of the list, right? How do you get to work? How do you find a bathroom? How do you do X, Y, Z? How do you find medical care? What is that adjustment period like for somebody that comes off of the streets? What is that first day look like coming into a home? How do they have you seen? I imagine you've seen some of that processing that they do.
It's a great question, and it's probably one of my surprises. Okay, so imagine you've been on the street for 10 years. You're probably up a good portion of the night, so that you're not physically abused, your stuff isn't stolen, and so you're out of cycle of a normal sleep cycle just because of the security concerns. You now have a home, you can lock the door. Security, number one. No one's going to steal my stuff. Okay. Number two, they probably haven't slept on a mattress in years. So I've observed people coming into their new home, and we believe in first fruits. It's going to be brand new. It's going to be color coded to their favorites. I mean, we do a really special job of welcoming them home with love and with gifts. They typically sleep on the floor because that's where they've slept for years. The bed is kind of new to them in some cases. These are some of my observations. I'm not saying it's every observation. So security, and they may sleep for days because they haven't had a really good sleep in so long. You know, you're out of cycle. There's noises. There's all of the distractions that has contributed to some of their challenges of living on the street. So those are just a couple of the observations. And it's theirs.
Yeah.
There's ownership. There's pride. Now, it's not perfect. We got hoarders out there. We got people that are struggling with those kinds of challenges. But as you walk through the community, you know, it's amazingly clean.
Mm-hmm. That sure is. And I got the chance to step inside of one of the homes that wasn't currently occupied, and yes, everything was brand new, beautiful, well kept. I mean, it was very impressive. So I imagine just that even that transition to new things, after probably spending a lot of time getting everything secondhand.
Yeah.
Well, or in good shape.
And think about it. You came on the tour, and we love it to the point where we're saying, hey, Evan, I could see myself living there. Why would we want a lesser standard for those brothers and sisters that have fallen on a difficult circumstance? Why not create an environment that you and I could say, I could see myself living there? Right. That's dignity.
So we can. This is just a bonus question, so we can keep this, or we don't have to. But I'd love to know if there's any success stories or any stories you'd like to share about any of the neighbors on the property.
I have a lot of stories. I have a lot. But one I love to share is a simple act of kindness. And you can tell you about some of the impact. And providing trust and see what can happen in that environment. So I'll describe this story. I love it. It's with my friend Tim. And so you were on the property. If you go from the video, you go by the bus stop. What's a circle? From the map you saw, there's a circle. So when I would leave my dwelling and get in my truck, I'd always have to go by the coming in and going out the bus stop. So many of my stories are related to encounters at the bus stop. It was February, probably about 8 or 9 years ago now. And my neighbor, Tim, who I love dearly, was at the bus stop. And I rolled down the window, so I typically would greet who's ever there, get to know the names, and just encounter your neighbors. And I said, hey, Tim, where are you going? And he goes, well, I'm heading down to the Methadone clinic. Oh, where's it at? And he goes, it's, gave me the location off Cesar Chavez down. And it's kind of on my way to work. I said, hey, it's on my way to work. Why don't you jump in the car and I'll bring you there. And so he gets in the car, and not far after we start the drive, he goes, yeah, you have no idea how impactful this is. I'm like, Tim, it's a simple ride. He goes, no, you don't understand. He says, he's probably 70 years old. He's a heroin addict, and he's a felon. He's had a criminal past. And he said, the last several years that I was in the penitentiary, I had an authority issue with the warden, and he put me in a pit 23 hours a day in Texas. What's it, 109 probably right now outside? So when he gets on a bus, and it's in February, and it's not cold here like other parts of the country, but it's still cold enough where the bus driver cranks the heat up. He gets on that bus, and he goes back to his hole. And he has to get off at every stop, breathe, recover. It takes him 2.5 hours to get to the methadone clinic. So he's describing this story to me, and I said, well, how often do you go to the clinic? And he goes, I go every other Tuesday. I said, well, when I'm in town, not traveling, I will put that on my calendar as a recurrent appointment every other Tuesday at 7 a.m. I'm driving Tim, and I could show you my phone right now. I'm driving Tim to the methadone clinic. And that's 7 or 8 years. He's one of my closest friends. He's been to my kids' parties. He's been to dinners. We've celebrated all of these things together from a simple ride. Wow. So my wife is a person of great faith. I kind of go the full gamut of risk and reward and what are the two extremes, best case, worst case. So we would head back to Minnesota for family vacations, and Wendy comes to me and she says, hey, I want Tim to watch our house while we're gone, and he can watch the cat, take care of the plants, and we're going to pay him $25 a day. Much like maybe when you're here with your dogs, you have to have someone care for them. And I said, you want a convicted felon, former heroin addict to watch your stuff? I was a little skeptical about that. Yep, that's what we're going to do. Okay. We came back a week later, and he's sitting on the porch, and he's like, it's all there. You trusted me.
Wow.
And we've since had several cases where we'll partner with our neighbors to care for our stuff. And the trust level of where it went from here, it just took a whole nother level. So I just give you that one story of where you're vulnerable, you're willing to take some risks, you're willing to have something happen. But the level and trust of those relationships, and Tim is a rock star out there. He's probably met every congressman and senator. He was interviewed by Leslie Stahl a couple weeks ago on 60 Minutes. And so his life has been transformed. We call him a seed neighbor, to where when he was living next to us, he was doing so well and had contributed so well to the community. We planted him in phase 2 to be a good influence on our new neighbors coming in. Wow. And that's my favorite.
What a story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. We've had the opportunity to touch on a lot of stories about vulnerability. We've had a lot of opportunities to talk about leadership, life experiences, trust, dignity. I want to kind of wind this down by talking about something more just personal to you, maybe, and that's about books. I'm trying to spend more time reading, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And so I like to give book recommendations where possible. So I'd love to know, first off, are there any books that have shaped your career, or in this case, your passions and your pursuit of solving problems?
It's interesting. I share about 6 books that have had an influence on my career, and there's one book that had an impact on this journey with homelessness. Coming out of West Point, one of the first books I read, and I was tired from studying, was The 1 Minute Manager, which is a classic. Okay. And I'm reading through this, and it's like, you've got how to manage, goal setting, 1 minute reprimands, 1 minute up. But the phrase that really impacted me was going out and finding people doing things right. So that was really important for me in creating an atmosphere of affirmation. And we're technologists and we're problem solvers. We start with a problem statement, so 1 Minute Manager. I also tried to shape our culture at TAL-US of a foundation of trust, okay? And the Speed of Trust is a book by Stephen Covey. I think it's the second. Stephen Covey Sr. wrote like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, another good book. But the Speed of Trust uncovered how you build trust, and it showed up in our work and also in our community. And it's really with two particular areas. Do you have character, and are you competent? So you could be the most honest person, but if you're not competent in your job, you won't have trust. And you could be the most competent person, yet have no integrity, and you won't have trust. So we've integrated that into our culture, our foundation, and our vision statement for TELUS is a trusted global partner providing technology that enables life. So trust has been a really big part of my leadership journey, and then I used that book to shape that. I just went to the Global Leadership Summit 2 weeks ago, and I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name, but the title of the book is Trust.
Okay.
And one of the keynote speakers said, trust formula is transparency plus empathy plus consistency equals trust. So I'm going to study that further, and I've got that book, but that's kind of the highlight of the additional information on creating that trust. And then from an operations standpoint, there's a bunch of those. Execution with Larry Bossidy. There's others like I put in 3 for 3s or 6 for 6s. What do you do for 3 key items for 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years? So you can kind of take a long-term, short-term vision. Sometimes I would say short, medium, and long-term goals, and I'd have engineers look at me, well, can you define that for me? So I defined it for them. And then there's a couple of others. Andy Stanley, Making Vision Stick. Take you about a half hour, maybe an hour. It's a real one of those small books. But how do you cast a vision and then continue to reinforce it? And that's been a good one. And then I also liked, because our culture and the military is more authoritative and hierarchical, John Maxwell, a leadership guru, wrote a book called 360-Degree Leader, where you're using influence rather than authority. And you can lead from anywhere within an organization. So I would say those are like the top 6 that I've had a pretty significant influence on my leadership and how we carry that out within my organization. The one key book that got me on this journey with homelessness, and it's a book that was converted into a movie, but I'd suggest reading the book, is Same Kind of Different as Me. And it's a story of an international art dealer that's wife started to volunteer in a soup kitchen in Fort Worth, Texas. And Denver Moore is a modern day slave, and he's homeless. And you've got a guy on one side of the societal spectrum and one on the other, and they become best friends. It's kind of Larry and Tim. But that's the book I read, I guess that was probably about 15 years ago.
Wow. And you can sample from those if you'd like, but I've got one fun little book question that a friend of mine, Pat Hazel, he's got a podcast called Creativity in Captivity. He interviews some fascinating folks, but one question he loves to ask, and I'm going to steal this from him, is what is your coma reading? As in, if you are in a coma, what book would you like somebody to read to you over and over again?
God's Word. I think that would bring, if you think of the fruit of the Spirit and love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, self-control, it's a living Word. And so if I'm in a coma, why not get God's Word to continue to feed the person reading and to feed me in that condition?
Oh, good answer. I like the aspect from both sides. That's good. Well, as far as questions for today, that's about all I have. Except I'd like to just quickly touch two things. How do you encourage listeners to identify their calling and passion? We've talked about mentorship in other episodes. We haven't really cracked the code to finding good mentors, but how would you encourage a listener to identify what is a passion worth pursuing, and how do you balance that with paying bills?
That's the hardest question I've got today. As part of our faith journey, sometimes we take these surveys called spiritual gifts. we all have these gifts and talents, right? And then how are we using them? And there's a theory or a premise, I guess, that you're wired with these gifts and you can assess them and you'll get clarity, versus why don't you try a bunch of different things and see what feeds your soul. So I've done a couple of the things that I've taken calls, evangelical calls, and been in Japan and been on the phone with someone because I was in their middle of the night and actually they were in a suicidal state, and so, but someone gave me the invitation to experience something that maybe I didn't know was a gift. And as you go through this, so I'm passionate about leadership. I'm passionate about, I believe my calling has been clarified around this hiring and housing veterans. But it's refined over time and doing different things. And you ask good questions about successes and failures. And so I don't believe there's a book and I'll go through an interview of 17 different questions. I'm sure there is. But I also think you got to navigate how you're wired, how people encourage you, where your education, preferences are, and then be open to just try some different experiences, and it may open up a space that you never imagined.
Wow. That's the best answer I've gotten so far, I think, and I've asked myself that many times.
Just say yes is what Alan would say.
I appreciate that. Oh, I love the book by Bob Goff, Love Does.
Yes.
That's one of my favorites.
Great book.
That'd be secondary good Como reading for me too.
Great book.
And so I know that folks can find Community First and the opportunity to volunteer and get involved at mlf.org. And so while you're trying to find your passion, I think that it's a good opportunity also to serve, and that will also help identify things that you may or may not be passionate about as well. Right?
Absolutely.
Well, any parting words that we want to impart on listeners before we close it up for the day?
Evan, thanks for the opportunity. This came from an invitation and from a tour. And so just saying yes at times can create relationships. I also applaud you for pursuing your passion to challenge individuals, to help them seek their passion and their legacy, and whether it's with fathers and their histories and families and the successors as you frame this podcast. So I just want to say thanks for this opportunity to explore some questions I haven't thought of either. And so every time we have a chance to have a dialogue, it unpacks different aspects of where we're working, where we're serving, our families, our legacies, our history, but also what's that future state that we can look forward to. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. I ask that God blesses you as you go through with this journey and get a chance to interview a variety of people. And I hope it blesses others that will be able to chance to listen.
Thank you so much.
This is Successor.